100 years ago this Friday, a number of brave men set sail for Antarctica on a voyage that would give Australia a stake on the icy continent. Their journey was part of the so-called heroic age because the explorers were venturing into some of the most unknown, inhospitable territory on the planet. One of the greatest of these adventurers was Australian Sir Douglas Mawson. A series of events is planned to celebrate the centenary of his team's Antarctic voyage, including a partial reenactment, as Tracy Bowden reports.
Antarctica, the world's coldest, driest and windiest continent, but surely one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Australia lays claim to 42% of this southern expanse, and that is largely due to the foresight of one man.
Mawson's undoubtedly an Australian hero. He had enormous vision. He didn't take a short-term view that Antarctica should be there just for the taking or that there should be simple geographic goals. He said there should be a long-term view. How can Australia best invest in this region that's so close to Australia?
It's an extraordinary history that we have, and Mawson was at the forefront of that alliance between science and physique and adventure, and that sort of the country was new, the century was new, and Mawson was one of our first heroes.
Born in Yorkshire in 1882, Douglas Mawson was just 2 when his family moved to Australia. He went on to study engineering and geology at the University of Sydney, then moved to Adelaide. His first trip to Antarctica was with British explorer Ernest Shackleton.
He was more anonymous than a lost dog when he arrived, and yet within a very few months Shackleton said, "I'm going to go for the South Pole. If I don't make it back in time and you think I'm out there, I want Douglas, you, to lead the expedition to come and find me." He was that kind of guy.
In 1911, Douglas Mawson led the first Australian expedition to Antarctica. On December the 2nd, he and his crew set sail from Hobart on board the Aurora. It would be a journey of both remarkable achievement and extreme adversity.
He wanted to establish an Australian base on Antarctica, which he did, and to chart the coast and to take very precise scientific measurements of the humidity, the temperature, the magnetic variations. He was a scientist. That was what drove Mawson.
At Cape Denison in Commonwealth Bay, Mawson's team built the wooden hut which would be home for 2 years. From here, Mawson launched the Far Eastern Sledging Party. After the death of his 2 companions, he survived for a month with next to no food before finally making it back to base, but with excruciating timing.
Comes over the hill back to the base, back to Mawson's hut, just in time to see this ship. Not only had his ship come in, but it had left again. It had left that very day. 5 hours earlier, the ship had steamed off, leaving him there for another year. Mercifully had left 5 men behind with him on the chance, they thought there was no chance that Mawson could still be alive.
The explorer spent the next 12 months recuperating from his ordeal and continuing his scientific observations, information which remains valuable to this day. Andrew Jackson has researched Antarctic policy for more than 20 years and says Australia's influence in the continent is in large part due to the foresight and enthusiasm of Douglas Mawson.
As a claimant to the Australian Antarctic Territory, that gave us a front seat at the table for the negotiation of the international regime, the Antarctic Treaty, which provides a governance system for the Antarctic. And that influence continues now through the life of the treaty, which has just passed 50 years, to give us a very significant say in decisions about how the region should be managed for the world. And we'll be reinforcing that in 2012 when Australia hosts the Antarctic Treaty meeting. So in Hobart, all of the 49 nations of the Antarctic will come together under the leadership of Australia's hosting of the meeting to continue the discussion about how Antarctica should be managed.
So this is the oldest map that we have in the exhibition. It was published in 1482. There was this large landmass, terra incognita.
To coincide with the centenary of Mawson's epic journey, an exhibition of historic maps is being staged at the State Library of New South Wales. It shows the gradual discovery of what lay in the frozen south.
Yes, it's a story about the landmass and it's about the development of Antarctica, and it's the story about the myths that have happened since classical Greek times through to the 21st century. So it's a whole fantastic story told through maps.
The maps from Douglas Mawson's expedition gave the first clear picture of not just the coastline, but the land itself.
The maps that we have in the exhibition are actually the manuscript maps that were done in preparation for the scientific report that was done. They're recording the actual sledging journeys, the voyages, the bases that people have set up, and the other thing that they have on them is fascinating. They also have the details of the weather, the wind conditions, the temperatures, whether they've found a particular glacier. So it gives an incredible detail, because the thing about the Australian Antarctic expedition was that they were actually doing the land survey. So all of the earlier maps were just about finding land itself, but this was when actually people were on the land, living on the land and exploring it.
At the age of 32, Douglas Mawson was knighted by King George V. He married his beloved Paquita and they had 2 daughters. The explorer led 2 more expeditions to Antarctica and in later years worked as Professor of Geology at the University of Adelaide. He died in 1958 at 76.
I think it's only now, 100 years after Mawson's expedition of 1911 to 1914, that it occurs to Australians that here we have a national hero who has really made a significant contribution which can never be denied Australia.
Tracy Bowden reporting.